When you're sitting at your drums, realistically, if you know how to tune them, you can make any sound you want, but what happens when we run into the idea that we think that we can't actually make the sound that we're looking for and we need to solve for that somehow? So you're finally ready to step into the world of recording drums and turning it into a profession for yourself. What does this mean for the gear you have, the gear you may need to have, and what exactly do you need to know to make the most of it? It's easy to envision a imaginary performance or gig or recording session in the future where you're going to be woefully unprepared, and when you show up that day, it's all going to fall apart and they're never ever going to want to play with you again. What are the chances that if you had a certain piece of gear, all of a sudden everything would be fine and you could actually get the job done exactly right and become their first call player? Recording sessions are the ultimate microscope for both your gear and also the quality of sound that you're making when you perform. It's easy to fall into a well of being concerned about whether or not the gear you have is up to the challenge because, again, this is supposed to be the scariest environment, right? We're not here to tell you that you never need to buy another drum for the rest of your life, but we are here to tell you that the idea that you're not going to be able to get the job done unless you have a certain piece of gear, we are here to talk about that. To go along with this discussion and bring it back to real on-the-ground issues, we're going to be using one snare drum today, our Acrolite, but we are going to treat it like today is a recording session where I am being asked, and we are being asked, to generate some really specific and really different sounds over the course of this session. People who do a tremendous amount of recording session work tend to have a tremendous amount of drums. It goes along with the job, especially if it's your primary playing lifestyle. The invisible thing behind the curtain is that none of them started out that way. In fact, nobody started out as a session drummer. They all started out as just drummers. It should go without saying, but we're going to say it, an array of gear, a massive array of gear, does not a session drummer make. If you play sessions, you are a session drummer. Many people will tell you that there's certain things that you need to be able to do this kind of job. A deep snare, a shallow snare, a tiny snare, a metal snare, a wood snare. The truth of the matter is that that's all just talking about physical drums. None of those are actually addressing the sound that you're going to be making or any sound that's getting asked of you. This is a gear for gear's sake phenomenon. And if you think about the players that we're addressing earlier, most of them got a lot of that gear after they started doing the work. They didn't one day buy a raft of equipment and then suddenly they were professionals. It's also worth noting that people at a very high level are often getting given gear by companies or getting it for free because they may use it sometime and those companies want to see their equipment associated with that player. But surely some of you are now saying, wait, but what about the sound of a bell brass snare or the sound of a superphonic? What am I going to do if somebody asks me for that sound and I don't have it? What a musician or a producer or whoever's behind the counter or across from you is really asking for when they use that kind of terminology is a sound. They have a sound associated with the name of that instrument or the style, and our job is not necessarily to show up with every drum under the sun, but instead to interpret what they're asking for and give them the sound. This could be considered gear for sound's sake, the idea that the gear makes the sound or that having that piece of equipment is going to in turn allow us to have that sound. In truth, if you have a good mental image and maybe even some references to these kinds of sounds, they're actually achievable within a very tiny degree of error with most other snare drums, provided that you have the experience and the ears to manipulate that sound. Instead of focusing on how the sound was made, pull it back and just think about the sound itself. What does it sound like? What are the characteristics of that sound? Could you imagine that sound in context, out of context? The sound is the only thing that matters, and the how is a real quick way to get hung up and slowed down in the process. The fact of the matter is there are multiple ways to make any sound. And as soon as you can really trust that that's the truth, you can step away from the idea that there's any particular way you have to follow to get there, and ultimately have much more freedom in the sounds you want to make and also sounds you might get asked to make. If you enjoy what we do on this channel, the experiments, the sounds, all of these different methodologies, please follow us on our Patreon. The link is below. It's the best way to help us continue to do this. We'd love to do it for as long as possible, so follow that link and check it out. We don't mean to say that getting a new drum isn't an exhilarating experience and the exploration of it isn't also an exhilarating experience, but consider the possibility that buying gear is often just about us. When you play music with other people and you play the drums, it's a very slim number of times in your life you're going to find yourself playing with or working for other drummers. The funniest thing about drum gear is that drummers are the only ones that care about it. Everybody else just cares about the sound that you're making, and at the end of the day, however you're making it is what's going to generate whether or not they're happy. This is doubly true in recording environments, both because, again, we're under the microscope, and also we're going to have the recording to listen back to. So we're going to be thinking about it for a while. Whoever you recorded for is going to have that with them, and this is a real great way to put your stamp on that and become the person that they call. In my personal experience, the sound that I made is the number one thing that reminds people of me and makes them want to bring me around for more work. At the same time, I can't think of a single instance where a producer, an artist, or even another musician actually considered what stuff I was playing. They reacted to the sound, and your experience will follow this too. In real-world music making, creativity and the quality of sound that you're generating is one of the big factors that's going to get you called and get you called again. And today, in the performances that we did here, that is what we were thinking about. Some of the stuff you heard was more middle of the road. Some of it was really left of center. We decided to get as experimental as we felt like just to see what would happen. But all under the guise of, what if we only have the one drum and a tuning key and maybe a couple of implements that are in our cymbal bag, and we're getting asked to be creative? That's the funnest part of all of this. You're going to get the session if you bring something special and creative to the environment. There's going to be 20 other people that would play and create very middle of the road things and not be that invested in the ultimate product. And honestly, if that's all there is, the guy who charges the least is the one who's going to get the gig. Instead, consider the idea that it's a collaborative creative process and you're bringing art to this situation. And you want to give whoever's paying you something beautiful that they're going to want to listen to over and over and over again. Because again, we're talking about recording and they live forever. Once upon a time in a fairly famous movie, the phrase, "if you build it, they will come," was uttered over and over again. And it got into the popular consciousness and has infiltrated all sorts of places, including the drumming environment. Buying the gear that the person who has the gig you want has is not going to get you the gig. One more time for the people in the back. Buying the gear that the person has whose gig you want is not going to get you that gig. There's no version of things where you're going to find yourself saying, oh, I would have gotten that session if only I had had that snare drum or that cymbal or that bass drum beater. It's simply not a thing. The best way in this case to dress for the job that you want to do sessions is to record whatever circumstances you can, the best you can do, and make sure that people can hear it, particularly people who might hire you to then play. Don't wait for the stars to align or the perfect microphones to show up or the snare drum you've been dreaming of to fall in your lap. Start now. The best time to start would be a couple of years ago. The second best time is today. Do this for yourself. Do what we did today. Take the drum in front of you and squeeze everything out of it that you can. Find its limitations, find every personality it has, and enjoy the process along the way.